Life Management Science Labs would like to acknowledge that we live and produce this podcast on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people. We'd also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands of our listeners and our international colleagues. We'd like to pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Hello everyone, and welcome to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by LMSL, the Life Management Science Labs. We are champions of life management science, providing structured insights informed by science and inspired by practice on key aspects of conscious living. Each week, we bring you scientific and practical insights on each element with the expert knowledge of professionals in the field. I am your host, Joanna. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Bouncing Back. I am your host, Joanna, and on today's topic, we are going to be chatting about the relationship between academic success and mental health. I'd love to welcome our guest, Gabrielle Wilcox, onto the show today. Gabrielle is an associate professor in applied child psychology at the University of Calgary. Hi, Gabrielle. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure. Before we get started, I'd love if you could tell us a bit more about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I actually started my career as a school psychologist in Pennsylvania. And as I was working with kids who had severe emotional and behavioral challenges or intellectual disabilities, I thought I needed more education to support them better. So I went back and got my doctoral degree and then worked as a clinical neuropsychologist there until I was invited to take a job here at the University of Calgary. So I've been here for 13 years as an associate professor, and right now I'm the chair of our department. And so, yeah, I teach and supervise students and do research. One of my areas of research is school-based mental health and transition to adulthood, especially for students who have additional needs. And I also do some work in educational neuroscience.
Yeah, great. And what drew you to psychology?
So I always found it to be interesting, but actually my undergraduate degree was in English education and I had a minor in psychology. And after I did my student teaching, I realized I didn't want to be in a classroom, but I like being in schools. So, well, one, I had, I think, maybe unfair expectations of high school students. I thought we would have conversations about Chaucer, but that's not what high school English classes are like. So it didn't end up being a really great fit for me, but I did like being in schools and I liked psychology. And I actually didn't know that school psychology existed till I was near the end of my undergraduate program. So I went back to school and it was actually a really nice fit.
Amazing. Well, I'd love to get to know you more with a section we call Have You Met Gabrielle Wilcox? So here we just ask you some fun little get to know you questions. So my first one for you is, what is your favorite book?
Yeah, so I looked at this one and it was incredibly hard. I read a lot, so I can't say that I have a favorite book. But some recent books that I've either read or listened to that I really enjoyed, Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers was hilarious. Definitely enjoyed that book quite a bit. A more serious novel I read recently was Labyrinth by Kate Moss. It was about in the 1100s in Europe with the Crusades, where they actually were persecuting a subgroup of Catholics who they didn't like the way they practiced Catholicism, but that was fascinating. And a nonfiction book I recently read that was interesting was The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. So those are some recent books that I've read that I've enjoyed.
Well, you caught my attention with the first one, Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. I'm in my true crime podcast phase at the moment, so that just caught my attention. So tell me a bit more about that one.
Yeah, so it is about this Chinese mom who lives in the U.S. and her husband has passed away and her adult son is kind of too American and not involved with her life as much as she would like. And then she comes down from her tea shop, from her house above the tea shop down, and finds a dead body. And so she decides that she's going to solve this mystery. And so she pulls all of these people in and she ends up changing their lives for the better and worse at the same time in trying to solve this mystery. So yeah, it was.
Oh wow!
It was kind of a murder mystery, but it was lighthearted and fun. Yeah.
Amazing. I'm going to jot that one down. That sounds really great. Thank you for sharing those ones. So we've got a few more here. So next one is, what movie have you enjoyed recently?
Yeah, I'm not generally a huge movie fan, but one movie I did enjoy recently was 3,000 Years of Longing.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's definitely a different take. It was kind of a genie movie, but it was an anthropologist who, I think she was an anthropologist, some kind of scientist who ends up meeting this genie and understands his life history. And it was not your typical movie. I like the ones that are a little bit offbeat.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't heard of that one. It sounds vaguely familiar, but yeah, I always love a new recommendation. So thank you. My next one is, are you listening to any podcasts at the moment?
Yeah, I listen more to books than to podcasts, but some podcasts I've listened to in the past have been Stuff You Missed in History and Stuff to Blow Your Mind. So the Stuff series are sometimes interesting to me.
Great. And what does that one look at?
So the Stuff You Missed in History class is just history, but it's like little forgotten bits that usually aren't covered. So like one that struck with me was like the history of ice cream. And so they like talk about those things are the history of people that you would normally think about. And Stuff to Blow Your Mind is a little bit more sciencey.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I'm, like I said before, I'm currently listening to true crime podcasts, and they're a bit like too serious sometimes, and I have to like step back from it because I'm like, wow, this is actually really sad. So I feel like those types of podcasts would be a really great way to break things up a bit from the seriousness of true crime. Amazing. So I've got one last question here, which is, do you have a role model?
Yeah, I think a role model I've always looked up to was Mother Teresa. I definitely appreciate how she demonstrated love in action. So she went out and actually did the things that she thought were important rather than just talking about them and telling other people to do them.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I haven't heard of anyone say that she's their role model before, so I love that. That's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that one. Perfect. So I think we can dive into our interview for today. So we're talking about two concepts here. We're talking about academic success. I can't even say the word. Academic success and mental health. I'd love if we could start off by defining what academic success is, because I feel like it looks different to everyone. And I was wondering if there is a universal definition or if it is more subjective.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen like a very specific definition, but I think broadly it is having the academic skills that you need to be successful in the trajectory that you're on.
Yeah. And how does mental health intertwine with academic success?
Yeah, so there are several different theories around this. One is that mental health predicts academic success, one that academic success predicts mental health, one that it's something else predicts both of them. And I think the one that I've seen a lot of evidence for is the bidirectional, that they affect each other. That if you are doing well academically, it is likely to support your mental well-being. And if you're mentally well, it's likely to support your academic success.
Yeah. And what are some common mental health challenges that people would face that would impact their academic success or performance?
I think the most common ones would be anxiety and ADHD and depression. So those are pretty common mental health disorders that interfere with your ability to do well in school. And I think a lot of the research suggests that that impact is greater in adolescence, both because adolescence is when we really start to see an increase in diagnosis of disorders like anxiety and depression, but also because of the difference in academic demands and other life demands in adolescence compared to like elementary school kids.
Yeah, because I was going to say, like, when I was in high school or even in like middle school, I noticed a lot of people around me and even some of my friends slowly started introducing terms like depressed or anxious. And those
Mhm.
terms started coming up a lot. And we were really exploring what sort of mental health is, but not in like a conscious way. Some people would be like, oh, I'm feeling really anxious or I'm having an anxiety attack. And do you think there is a correlation to education and like how that impacts these things like emerging in our lives at a young age?
Yeah, I think with that, actually, there's another issue going on with how we talk about mental health challenges. So, with mental health challenges, there's been a lot of reduced stigma and openness, which has been good. But then there's also been a blurring about what actually a mental illness is. And so
Yeah.
now lots of students, especially in high school, take kind of normal experiences, right? So everybody feels down sometimes. Like if you break up with your boyfriend, you're probably going to be down for a while. Or if you have a big exam coming up, you're probably stressed and anxious. And there's been a blurring about what's normal kinds of these experiences and what is a mental health problem, which I think then
Yeah.
has made a lot of young people think that they have mental health problems when really they're experiencing life.
Yeah. And how do we make that distinction between the two?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is one around building capacity to deal with challenge, right? So helping students to um, acknowledge the challenges of life and also know that they have the strength and the coping skills and teaching them the coping skills to deal with that. And then to also help them understand the difference because people with severe anxiety and depression have a different experience than the normal everyday stressors around anxiety and depression that are just part of everyday life.
Yeah, and what are some of the like coping mechanisms that individuals can use to help them deal with this or help them identify if what they're going through is normal and just part of like everyday life or the things that come up in life, or if they actually have a mental illness?
Yeah. So I'll break it down. So coping skills, right, are the things that we do to help ourselves feel better. So
Yeah.
one of the things my students often say is one of their coping skills that I kind of push them on is like watching Netflix or getting on social media. And I really challenge them to pay attention to how they feel after, watching cat videos for 6 hours, right? So if you really feel better, right, then maybe that is a good coping mechanism for you. But I would say most of us actually feel worse, right? We feel like we wasted time and then that staring at the screen for so long actually makes us feel worse. So being a little bit more critical about what actually is supportive of ourselves rather than just distracting for a while. So things that really are generally helpful are getting outside. There's lots of research that shows that being in nature, even just seeing green space, right, can be beneficial for your mood and how you're feeling. Exercise is really good. Spending time with people that you care about, volunteering and giving back to the community. So those would all be ways of good coping. And then how do you tell the difference between normal experiences and an actual diagnosis? One would be how long it lasts. So in order to meet the criteria for a diagnosis, these symptoms have to last for a while. It can't just be, oh, yesterday I was sad. It's weeks at a time where you're mostly feeling very anxious or very depressed. And then there also has to be functional impairment. So it has to really be interfering with your ability to do school or your ability to engage in home life activities.
Yeah, and I found it interesting when you mentioned that people normally resort to like Netflix or social media as a coping strategy. And I find that really interesting because they're the most mind-numbing things to do. And it's like if you want to cope, like shut down and like don't deal with anything. So
Yeah.
like I do that as well. I like go on Netflix because I'm like, I don't have to try here. I can just watch what's happening on the screen. I don't have to do anything. I don't have to engage. And I'm letting something else just deal with things for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that we can never do those things, but as a way to cope with things, it's not going to help us feel better in the long run if we're feeling down or anxious.
Yeah. Would we be able to like draw upon maybe a more specific example or instance where someone might be feeling a certain type of way or going through a certain thing and a coping mechanism they can use for that?
Yeah. Do you have a specific kind of
Oh,
situation you're thinking of?
let's see. So, oh, I don't even know if this is a good one, but we've got someone in high school and it's exam time and they're feeling really stressed out and anxious, and they don't know how to deal with that, but they know they've got to study for their exams, they've got to get through this, but if they're struggling, what would you say?
Yeah. So one would be to understand what's going on with your anxiety. If it's exam time and you're like, oh crap, I didn't do anything all semester, right? And so now I'm going to pay for my choices. That's going to be a different experience than you've actually put the time in and you've been studying and you're still feeling anxious. So I would say on the first one, you'll do the best that you can, but with the understanding that you have some responsibility for this. And so if you go into it then and do poorly, how can you reframe that as a growing experience, right? So, okay, I made some bad choices, and as a result, I got a poor mark, but I have control over this, right? So in the future, I'm going to make these different choices about my studying so that I can be in a different spot, so that it's not like I'm stupid, right? I can't do it, or the teacher wasn't fair and the test wasn't fair. And then on the other side, if you have done the studying, I think, again, it's around identifying maybe those thinking errors that you have. So people who are a little bit more anxious are more likely to be catastrophizing, right? So they're like, I'm going to fail this test, and then I'm going to flunk out of school, and I'm going to live in my parents' basement forever. So really looking at the evidence for that. So how many exams have you failed before? So most likely those students haven't failed very many. There's not a lot of evidence that they are going to fail, or that if they fail this one, that it's going to, make them drop out of school and live in their parents' basement forever. So kind of taking a step back and looking at the evidence that you have for those maladaptive thoughts, and then changing your thoughts can actually change the way that you feel.
Yeah. And do you think this sort of proactive and resilient mindset is achievable for everyone or easily cultivated?
I think it's achievable for most people. I think sometimes it's effortful, right? So it is something that you can't just go tomorrow, oh, I'm going to change the way I think about things and make that happen, right? So like when people go for therapy and get cognitive behavior therapy, it takes some time and it takes some work, especially if you've been playing, this shows how old I am, but tapes, right? Sorry, playing your MP3 or whatever over and over and over again with these maladaptive thoughts, right? You come to the point where you believe them. So you have to do a lot of work to retrain those thoughts and to talk back to them and change them. So I do think most people can make those changes, but it's not going to happen in one sitting. It's going to take some effort.
Yeah, definitely. And what role do you think societal expectations and pressures and even cultural factors play when it comes to like our relationship between academic success and mental health?
Yeah, so I've been thinking a lot, especially about the role of technology and social media on some of these things. And so The Anxious Generation, that book really talked about how technology, and again, especially video games and social media, have made huge impacts on the way that students engage in the world and engage in their academics. So one, technology it is created to hook us in, right? So I just saw some recent research, I think it was by the Common Sense Media Census, where the average 14 to 17-year-old spends almost 9 hours a day on their phone or computer, right? So if we think about so even if there were no negative effects of social media and technology, that amount of time alone, right, really interferes with your ability to think deeply, read deeply, study, or even spend time with your friends. So I think that really impacts. And then social media really sets us up for unfair comparisons with people who aren't real, right? So even our friends, right, they curate everything that they put on. So they'll tell you about their fantastic vacation to Europe and not the fight that they had with their mom, right? Or the fact that they can't keep their room clean. So that you get these kind of images that aren't true. And then on top of that, the physical changes that, you know, people Photoshop everything and put filters on. And so there's all of these comparisons that make people not feel great. And then again, especially by high school, when you're not feeling great about who you are, then it's really hard to put in the time and effort to be successful in school.
Yeah, and that's such a great point you bring up about social media, because we go on social media to try and, you know, make ourselves feel better because it's fun to scroll, you know, it's that dopamine hit. But also then we come across those things that, you know, we don't really want to see, like, you know, people are showing off their lives. They're showing off, it's essentially a highlight reel of their life. And we think, wow, their life is perfect. And I'm going through all this stuff right now. And I can't seem to relate to anyone on Instagram at the moment because everything just looks so great and like cookie cutter perfect. And I don't know how to attain that when I am this way or feeling this way and no one else in the world is. Exactly. Like we just think everyone on social media is perfect and they don't go through these things because obviously who's going to post about them being sad? I mean, there are some people who do that and that is their like brand, but it's not common.
Yeah. Or they do it in the, like, I sell bling about my anxiety, right? And then, you know, make money off it instead of it being more the authentic, I'm struggling with something, right? Like I'm struggling with this aspect of myself or this aspect of my schooling or relationships. And that open vulnerability just doesn't happen very frequently on social media.
Yeah, 100%. And do you think there are resources, or I'm sure there are, but like what resources are out there to support people balancing mental health and their academics?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it really depends on what age group they are, right? So thinking about elementary school students, the best thing that we can do to support their mental health is to support their academics. Yeah. Especially reading. So kids who can't read, it's a very public difficulty, right? Everybody knows if you're struggling with reading, but it's also the foundation to access all other parts of the curriculum and academic success for the rest of your life. And there's been a lot of research that shows that early reading difficulties predict later social emotional problems, but the other way isn't true. So in those early years, really focusing on teaching kids so that they can be successful, and then they can start to believe in themselves that I have the skills and the competence to be able to achieve and do what I need to do in school is foundational. And then by the time you're in high school, I think that continues, but I think that then it separates a bit. So if you're not doing well in school, you're not well. And so it's kind of curvilinear, right? So then if you're doing well in school, you're probably doing well mentally. But then you get to this other end where there's this hyper competitiveness, or if I don't get a 99% or 100, then my life is over, or trying to get into Ivy League schools. So I think at that end, then that hyper competitiveness can cause problems. So on those, I think it's maybe even just reducing some of the competitiveness, saying, you know, like, don't look at your grades for a week. How about we just do this one activity to learn rather than to achieve a mark? So I think the things that we do to support kids vary depending on where they are in their academic career, and then in high school, where they are on that academic spectrum.
Yeah. And I think what can be a bit jarring is like when you're in high school, it's very much like your success is tied to getting, like you said, that 99 or acing that test or exam. But then when you transition out of high school, like that relationship between mental health and academics, I think changes because the world opens up a lot more and people aren't just focused on acing that exam. And then all these other factors come into play. So I'd love to talk about that transition, how people can deal with, you know, the mental health aspects of that, moving from an environment where education is the center of everything, and, doing really well at those tests, to like, oh, I'm at university or college now and things are different here.
Yeah, so I actually do a therapy with a good number of young adults who are like in that university. And it's interesting how many of them come with depression or anxiety symptoms, but really what they had was unpreparedness for what to expect at university. And so we end up actually not working on their anxiety or depression, because what they end up telling me is that I don't know how to study. I don't know how to manage my time. I don't know how to do these things because I don't have adults telling me what to do anymore. And because of that, I wasn't doing well academically, and now I feel crap, right? So we actually work on, well, how do we study? How about you turn off your phone and go to sleep, right? So some of those just basic skills. So like all of a sudden, mom and dad aren't there saying, it's midnight. Maybe you should like turn some electronics off and go to bed, or maybe you should set some time aside to study without your phone. And so they just need to learn how to do some of those things on their own in order to be able to be successful in university and feel like they have the skills that they need for that new environment.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess when they're in that transition period, they're trying to balance this like new life. Like there's academics, there's mental health, and I'm sure there's other aspects as well. So are there any strategies you can recommend for balancing everything?
Yeah. So one, prior, I think high school should probably do a better job of preparing students for university, because so many of them are not prepared for the demands. But I think a lot of them are around those executive functions. So how do you get all your course outlines and make your plan for the year, right? Knowing that you have that paper that's due in 6 weeks. And so many students don't know how to take that and break it down into small pieces so that they're doing a little bit of it every single week. And instead, they wait till the week before and then they're overwhelmed. They don't know how to do it. It's way too big and overwhelming to do it in a week. So learning those kinds of managing your time and your effort and how you put all those together is a really important part. Another thing that a lot of students struggle with, especially if they're moving away to university, is how do I make friends in this new environment? So especially if you're somebody who has either had drug and alcohol problems, and so you don't want to go down that route, or you just don't want to go down that route at all. Lots of students have said that's a problem. Like, how do I make friends if I don't drink? Because there's often on a lot of campuses a drinking culture. So finding other groups and other ways. And some of the research that we've done, one of the things that students have said that's made the biggest difference is having those support groups. So whether it's still their family, if they're living at home, or a sports team, or some of their clubs where they feel like they can get that social support as well during transition, is really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to talk about some potential research areas that you think could be further explored or addressed, or what piques your interest in this realm? Like, what can we look into further?
Yeah, well, the things that pique my interest are the kids who have additional needs. So especially students with learning disabilities. Surprisingly, learning disabilities are one of the most common disabilities that students have, and they're one of the least researched areas. So we have these huge numbers of students who are graduating from high school, many of them going on to post-secondary with learning disabilities, and we don't know how they're doing. And we don't know what their needs are or how they're coping with these big transitions without those additional support. So I think that's an area where we don't understand enough. And I think a student population that doesn't get enough support during those transitions. And we know even less about what happens to them when they don't go to university. So lots of people who have ADHD or learning disabilities or other needs take other routes into adulthood. Like maybe they join the military, or they do an apprenticeship, or go straight into the workforce. And we really don't know how they make that transition or how their mental health is during that time. And I think that would be a really important area to understand and find ways to support them so they can be successful in that transition.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting as well is that when you're in high school, like, it's a smaller cohort, so you know who everyone is and you're very aware of everyone. But then you move into university and it's like this big sea of people now, and everyone kind of like merges into one person, and we're all just like these robots that go to university, and we're all like the same. And there's a lack of individuality, I guess. It's not as easily expressed because there's so many people. So how do we deal with that, and how do we help people feel seen and heard and know that, you know, what they're going through academically or mentally matters just as much as the person next to them?
Yeah, so I know our university, and I think lots of others, have really focused on university mental health and trying to make venues clearer about how you get services. So I know that there's a lot more kind of all-encompassing paying attention to students. So they really are looking at students' grades. So when they're noticing that student is not okay, they're actually coming in and going, what's going on? What do you need? How can we support you to get you back on track? Also trying to not only have the formal kind of avenues to get supports through like student services, but also informal mentoring kinds of supports. So that was another thing that in our research that we heard, especially from people who are maybe the first in their families to go to university or just the oldest of the kids, right? Like, I don't even know how to sign up for classes. I don't even know how to do all these like normal logistic things. So having some more informal supports and then having those be ways that can kind of triage people and go, yeah, this is all you need, or I think you need some more support in getting students to where they need to be. So I do think in the last 10 years or so, I think universities have really stepped up their game to try to improve supports for students.
Yeah, great. And I think that's so great to hear, because university can be so hard and you can feel so alone, and it's so hard to know who to approach, or if you can even approach anyone, because you're here doing this on your own. Like you said, your parents aren't there with you telling you what to do. So it's very much like, okay, if I can't figure it out, then I guess I'm just on my own doing this. So it's so important to hear that.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I'd also love to talk about some practices and habits now. So I'd love to zoom into maybe one practice that you employ or recommend to navigate mental adversity.
Yeah, so my favorite is being outside. So living in Alberta, we're near the Rocky Mountains, which are beautiful. But again, just disconnecting. So having time when you're not on any devices, where you're not getting all of that kind of noise and input from other people, and just having time to be without having to compare yourself to other people or do things all of the time, I think is a really important way to recenter yourself and to, again, remember what's important. So I think that we can be distracted by all of this stuff, right? And it can seem so important because it's in your face and right there. But if you really stepped back and thought about what you value as a human, you might think that, you know what, really, whether if I have the same eye makeup as that person, right, or if I wear the same size clothing, that really isn't the most important thing to me about what my values are. So I think, spending some of that time for me in nature, and it could be, but figuring out what that is for you. And again, maybe it is scrolling through TikTok, but my guess is for most of us, that's not what it is. So whether it's doing yoga or taking a walk with your friends or your dog, or but doing those things where you're kind of recentering yourself as a human. And then with that too, knowing, as you kind of mentioned, that academics aren't everything. Like, I can't remember the last time anybody asked me what my GPA was at any point of my academic career, right?
Yeah.
So I think even if school wasn't your thing and you go an apprenticeship or into the job, you can be a successful human. You can contribute, you can be kind, you can give. And so I think we should all do our best at whatever we do. And when you're in school, academics, but it isn't a defining feature of us. We are whole humans, right? And we have lots of other attributes that for some of us are more important.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like taking time to not be on your phone is so important, because what I've noticed is when I'm on my phone, I allow what I'm looking at or absorbing to dictate how I feel. Like, I could be feeling pretty great, and then I go on my phone and I'm like, oh, I don't really like seeing that. That's kind of impacting my mood. And then I'll have a day where I'm like barely on my phone. Like I go through my entire day, and then at the end of the day, I'm like, okay, cool. Let's like do a bit of scrolling. And I'm like, wow, that actually feels really refreshing because I've allowed myself to dictate how I want to feel, as opposed to just absorbing all these energies from other people and what they're putting out there into the world and letting that dictate how I'm supposed to feel.
Yeah, and some schools have recently been banning cell phones, and they've found that kids are better humans, right? So when my kids were younger and they would lose their phones when they got in trouble, they were nicer humans when they had lost their phones for a couple of days. Everybody liked being around them. But on the academic side, they found that in those schools, the students who benefited the most were the ones who were most at risk. So the kids who were struggling when cell phones weren't allowed in schools, their grades went up significantly and they had a lot more academic success, which probably made them feel better about themselves and their capacity to be successful students.
Yeah, and for those of us who are wanting to try that, you know, like be off our phones a bit more, get outside, how can we integrate that into our daily lives, especially if we're so used to being indoors all the time or just being on our phones all the time?
Yeah, so I would suggest you read some of Cal Newport's work. So he has one book called Digital Minimalism. So he really, in that book, talks about first, like taking off all social media for a month. And what he wants you to do with that is to really pay attention to what you need and what you value, right? So he's saying for some people that can bring some value to your life, but for many of us, maybe it doesn't. So he suggests that, you know what, if you want to get on Instagram, maybe just do it on your computer so that it's not there all of the time. Another of his books is called Deep Work. And so again, even just having times where you have no access to those can help you engage more deeply in your work, whether you're a student or a professor or an architect or whatever you are. Having that time where your attention isn't drawn all of these different directions can really change the depth of your work. And he has said that it actually reduces how much work he has to do. So in academia, we are known for working all of the time and it being that kind of a really stressful work all the time job. And Cal Newport says that he works pretty much from 8 to 5 or 6 and doesn't work on weekends and doesn't work in the evening and is a highly productive academic because he uses his time well and he can engage deeply. So so his work would be one to read to kind of play around with what that could look like. I've taken off social media off of my phone, and if I want to, I get on it sometimes, but I get on it on the web instead to try to, and I've turned off all my notifications. So I'd say that would be another thing, right? So the notifications, they like are always distracting you. So if you're thinking like you're trying to write a paper or read a book and ding, 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 right? So even if you don't look at it, it's distracting you and saying, you're missing out. You're missing out. There's really important stuff that can make you feel like you're missing out on stuff. And it can interfere with your relationships with people right in front of you. So many times people will pull out their phone and look at that in the middle of your conversation, right? So it interferes with our ability to have deep, meaningful relationships and do work. So so if you're thinking about reducing your reliance on technology, definitely read some Cal Newport stuff.
Great. Definitely have to check that one out. And I can 100% relate. Sometimes I'll be like working on something for work or university on my laptop and I see my notifications going off and like it builds this sort of anxiety in me because I'm like, I got to have a look, like what's going on here? And then I'm like trying to battle this thing of like, I got to do my work, but I also got to check my notifications. And it's really tough sometimes. And just in terms of like how this practice can impact our overall life, if we start integrating these strategies that you've been talking about, how can we see like our perception to life or, you know, our motivation change?
Yeah, so I think that there's been a lot of research showing that lots of those coping skills make people feel better, right? So people who exercise tend to feel better, both physically and emotionally. People who spend time outdoors, right? Some physicians even prescribe green space time, right? Like it is actually a thing where it's prescribed by doctors in some countries that you need to go outside. So I think that there's a continuing to build evidence that these things make us feel better. So I do think that if we intentionally engage in making time for the things that make us feel good, that we're more likely to feel good and then more likely to be able to be successful in our jobs. But again, also being successful in our jobs helps us to feel good. And for students, school is their job. So any supports that we can give for students to help them be successful at that job that they have will also support them in feeling good.
Yeah, for sure. And thank you so much for sharing these strategies with us. And I think getting outside is so underrated. And it sounds so simple, just go outside. But a lot of people don't do it because they're like, it's just going outside. I don't need to go outside.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for sharing those with us. I'd love to move into our open mic section, which is our last section for today.
Yeah.
And I know you have a fun little topic to talk to us about. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah. So, so again, living in the Rockies, hiking and backpacking is one of the best things about living here. So the Rocky Mountains have, I think, some of the most beautiful hikes that you can possibly get to. And like for one, it's physically exhausting and hard. I think one of the things I like about it is that when you're out there, like, and you want to give up, you don't really have a choice because nobody's going to come with a helicopter and come take you home, right? You have to hike yourself back out. So it really does build up some of that resilience and that you have to do the hard thing, but you get such amazing payoffs for it. So when you hike, you get to see things that you can only get to if you put in that hard work.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm not that much of a hiker. I want to be. Definitely don't have the Rockies anywhere near me. But I know when I'm like going on a little hike, I'm like, oh, this is the worst thing ever. This is so hard. And then I get to the top and I'm like, oh, that wasn't that bad. That wasn't even that hard. And so I love that feeling of like when you finish the hike or you get to the top of wherever you're hiking to and you're like, wow, that was so worth it. And there's no feeling better than that feeling. I love it.
Yeah.
And I'd love to
that like so few people get to see it, right? That you get to see this lake or this mountaintop that most people don't bother to put the effort in to go to.
Yeah, because it seems like so much effort. And like whenever you hike to that spot or that mountain or whatever, like you're not seeing the same thing over and over again because it's always going to change. And that's what I love about hiking. Like it always change every time you do that same hike. And I'd love to ask what your favorite hike has been or a spot that you go to.
Yeah, so I have a lot of them, but there's one hike that my husband and I do every year. It's called North and South Buller Pass. So you go over 2 mountain passes, but in between there's this big valley. And when you're there, I always feel like I'm in Lord of the Rings or something. It's like nobody has ever been there. It's like you're the only humans who have ever found it. And so I always find that to be a super amazing feeling, to be that alone. You can't see anybody, you can't hear anybody, and unless there's an airplane overhead, but you can pretend that you're explorers in this place that nobody's ever seen before.
Oh, that sounds awesome. And how long do your hikes normally take?
That one's a longer one. So that one's about 18K.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
People
that's
hike
a
way
long
longer
one.
than that, but that's one of our longer ones. Yeah.
Oh, that would take, I'm going to guess like, I can't even guess how long that would take. How long does that take?
Yeah, so it takes probably like 6 or 7 hours total. Like if we take our time and take a big break and things like that. There are people who are speed hikers. I'm not a speed hiker.
Oh yeah,
but yeah,
I
so there are probably people who can do it really fast. But
yeah, awesome. Well, I think that sounds so amazing, and it's so great that you live somewhere where you like love being in the outdoors and you love exploring, and it's so amazing to hear about that because often our hobbies involve our phones or something on our laptops or you know, something that has to do with technology. So it's so refreshing to hear about hobbies that have nothing to do with technology.
Well,
and
I do
more
have
to do
to take pictures.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we can't go hiking without taking photos, but that doesn't count.
I confirmed that I did it.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I love that. And even like photography while hiking, I feel like that's another hobby on top of another hobby. Like I see some amazing nature photography.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Gabrielle, for sharing your insights on this topic with us and also your passion for hiking. I've absolutely enjoyed chatting with you today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. And for those of us who want to find out a bit more about your work and what you do, where can we go?
Yeah, so you can look on the website at the University of Calgary. You can look me up there. And if you want my research, I'm on ResearchGate.
Perfect. Great. Well, we've also got Gabrielle's details down in the description below if you missed that. So thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time. You have been listening to Bouncing Back, the Personal Resilience Science Insights podcast produced by the Life Management Science Labs. Listen to episodes from LMSL's 10 Life Management Perspectives on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or other podcasting apps on your smartphone. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider rating our show, sharing it, and subscribing to our channel, as it helps other people find it and us grow to bring you more quality resources. More of our work can be found on our website, pr.lmsl.net, where you can join our movement. I'm Joanna. Thanks for tuning in.